We are used to thinking very highly of democracy, and by extension of ancient Athens, the civilization that gave rise to it. The Parthenon has become almost a byword for democratic values, which is why so many leaders of democracies like to be photographed there. It's therefore very striking to discover that one of ancient Greece's great achievements, philosophy, was highly suspicious of its other achievement, democracy. The founding father of Greek philosophy, Socrates, is portrayed, in the dialogues of Plato, as hugely pessimistic about the Athenian system, a perspective that might initially seem counterintuitive given the modern reverence for both philosophical inquiry and democratic governance. Socrates' skepticism, as depicted by Plato, stemmed from a profound concern about the potential for demagoguery and irrational decision-making within a purely democratic framework. He questioned whether the general populace, without specialized knowledge or rigorous ethical training, could consistently make wise and just choices for the state. His famous analogy of the ship, where he argued that selecting a captain by popular vote rather than expertise would be disastrous, perfectly encapsulates this apprehension. He believed that governing required specific skills and virtues, much like any other craft, and that these were not necessarily inherent in every citizen. This perspective contrasts sharply with the contemporary ideal of universal civic participation as an intrinsic good. Furthermore, Socrates was critical of the susceptibility of democratic assemblies to rhetorical manipulation. He observed how skilled orators could sway public opinion through emotional appeals rather than logical arguments, leading to policies that might be popular but ultimately detrimental. He feared that the pursuit of popular acclaim could overshadow the pursuit of truth and justice. This concern resonates even today, as societies grapple with the impact of misinformation and the influence of charismatic figures on public discourse. The ultimate irony of Socrates' life, his trial and execution by a democratic Athenian jury, serves as a powerful testament to his fears. Accused of impiety and corrupting the youth, he was condemned by the very system he critiqued. This event profoundly shaped Plato's own views, solidifying his conviction that democracy, in its unbridled form, could be dangerous and even tyrannical. Plato, in his Republic, went on to propose an ideal state ruled by philosopher kings, individuals trained in reason and virtue, as a stark alternative to what he saw as the inherent flaws of democracy. Therefore, while the Parthenon stands as a symbol of democratic ideals, the intellectual legacy of ancient Greece also offers a powerful and enduring critique of those very ideals. The philosophical tradition, from Socrates to Plato, invites us to look beyond simplistic admiration and to engage in a deeper, more critical examination of the strengths and weaknesses of democratic governance, a conversation that remains profoundly relevant in the modern world. About the whole business of democracy. In Book 6 of the Republic, Plato describes Socrates falling into conversation with a character called a daemoness and trying to get him to see the flaws of democracy by comparing a society to a ship. If you were heading out on a journey by sea, ask Socrates, who would you ideally want deciding who was in charge of the vessel? Just anyone or people educated in the rules and demands of seafaring. The latter, of course, says a daemoness. So why then, responds Socrates, do we keep thinking that any adult should be deemed fit to run the ship of state? Socrates' analogy is a powerful and enduring critique of democratic principles when applied without careful consideration. He posits that just as a ship requires a knowledgeable and skilled captain to navigate treacherous waters and ensure the safety of its passengers and cargo, so too does a state require competent and educated leaders to guide its citizens through complex societal challenges. The implicit argument is that governing is not an intuitive skill but a specialized art or science, demanding specific expertise, wisdom, and a deep understanding of justice and ethics. He suggests that allowing just anyone, regardless of their qualifications or understanding of governance, to steer the state is akin to entrusting a vessel to someone who has never studied navigation or meteorology. The outcome in both scenarios is likely to be disastrous, leading to chaos, inefficiency, and potentially the ruin of the entire enterprise. This comparison highlights Socrates' profound concern about the potential for demagoguery and uninformed decision-making within a purely democratic system, where popular opinion might override reasoned judgment and expertise. His goal was to provoke a dementis, and by extension, the reader, into critically examining the unexamined assumption that all voices equal weight and wisdom in the complex task of national leadership. That any old person should be fit to judge who should be a ruler of a country. Socrates' point is that voting is a skill, not a random intuition. And like any skill, it needs to be taught systematically to people. Letting the citizenry vote without an education is as irresponsible as putting them in charge of a trireme sailing to Samos in a storm. Socrates was to have first-hand, catastrophic experience of the foolishness of voters. In 399 BC, the philosopher was put on trial on trumped-up charges of corrupting the youth and impiety. A jury of 500 Athenians, chosen by lot from the citizenry, ultimately condemned him to death. This tragic event, the execution of one of the greatest philosophical minds by a democratic assembly, served as a stark and painful validation of Socrates' deepest fears about the unbridled power of the populace. His condemnation was not the result of a deliberate, reasoned pursuit of justice, but rather, as many historians and philosophers argue, the outcome of political maneuvering, personal animosities, and the manipulation of public sentiment. The jurors, lacking a systematic education in critical thinking, law, or the nuances of philosophical inquiry, were susceptible to rhetoric and emotional appeals, rather than engaging in a dispassionate evaluation of the charges. Socrates believed that truly informed voting, the ability to discern genuine leadership qualities and sound policy, requires a cultivated intellect, an understanding of ethical principles, and a deep knowledge of the state's needs. Without such an education, he contended, voters are merely expressing uninformed opinions, which can be easily swayed and lead to catastrophic decisions. His own demise at the hands of an uneducated jury underscored his belief that democracy, absent a robust system for educating its citizens in the art of governance and critical judgment, risks devolving into mob rule, where wisdom is overshadowed by popular passion and fleeting sentiment. Of Athens, a jury of 500 Athenians was invited to weigh up the case and decided by a narrow margin that the philosopher was guilty. He was put to death by hemlock in a process which is, for thinking people, every bit as tragic as Jesus' condemnation has been for Christians. Crucially, Socrates was not elitist in the normal sense. He didn't believe that a narrow few should only ever vote. He did, however, insist that only those who had thought about issues rationally and deeply should be let near a vote. We have forgotten this distinction, to our peril, in modern democratic societies. Socrates' critique of democracy was not a call for an aristocracy of birth or wealth, but rather an aristocracy of intellect and virtue. He envisioned a society where citizens were rigorously educated in critical thinking, ethics, and civic responsibility, preparing them to make informed and rational decisions for the common good. His ideal voter was not someone born into privilege, but someone who had undergone a profound process of self-examination and intellectual development, capable of discerning truth from sophistry and justice from expediency. He believed that the unexamined life was not worth living, and by extension, an unexamined vote was not worth casting. The tragedy of his trial and execution underscored his conviction that an uneducated populace, easily swayed by rhetoric and prejudice, could pose a grave danger to both individuals and the state. The Athenian jury, acting on emotions and conventional wisdom rather than deep philosophical understanding, condemned a man whose sole aim was to encourage critical thought and moral introspection. This event, forever etched in the annals of Western thought, serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the potential for democratic systems to err when the electorate lacks the necessary intellectual and ethical foundations. In contemporary democracies, Socrates' concerns remain remarkably pertinent. The complexity of modern issues, the proliferation of information and misinformation, and the pervasive influence of media all highlight the need for a citizenry capable of rational deliberation and critical judgment. The challenge, then, is not to restrict the right to vote, but to cultivate a populace that exercises this right with wisdom and foresight, understanding that voting is not merely an act of self-expression, but a profound civic responsibility that demands thoughtful engagement and a systematic education in the art of governance. Between an intellectual democracy and a democracy by birthright, we have given the vote to all without connecting it to wisdom, and Socrates knew exactly where that would lead, to a system the Greeks feared above all, demagoguery. Ancient Athens had painful experience of demagogues, for example, the louche figure of Alcibiades, a rich, charismatic, smooth-talking, wealthy man who eroded basic freedoms and helped push Athens to its disastrous military adventures in Sicily. Socrates knew how easily people could be swayed by superficial charm and persuasive rhetoric, rather than by sound judgment and genuine concern for the public good. Socrates' distinction is crucial. He did not advocate for an exclusionary system based on inherited status, but rather one that prioritized intellectual and moral preparedness for the weighty responsibility of self-governance. He foresaw that a democracy unmoored from a commitment to cultivating wisdom in its citizens would inevitably become fertile ground for demagogues. These figures, with their captivating but ultimately hollow promises, exploit the passions and prejudices of the unthinking masses, leading society astray. The example of Alcibiades, a flamboyant and self-serving general who manipulated Athenian public opinion for personal gain, served as a potent historical lesson for Socrates and Plato, illustrating the dangers of unchecked popular power. Alcibiades' influence led Athens into the catastrophic Sicilian expedition, a military blunder that significantly weakened the city-state and contributed to its eventual defeat in the Peloponnesian War. The core of Socrates' concern was that without a systematic education designed to foster critical thinking, ethical reasoning, and a deep understanding of governance, the populace would be ill-equipped to identify and resist such manipulative figures. When the right to vote is treated as an inherent entitlement rather than a responsibility demanding careful preparation, the door is open to leaders who prioritize popularity over prudence and personal ambition over collective well-being. In our modern context, with the ubiquitous presence of social media and the constant bombardment of information, Socrates' warnings about demagoguery and the need for an intellectual democracy resonate more strongly than ever. The challenge for contemporary democratic societies is to bridge this gap, ensuring that while the right to vote remains universal, it is also accompanied by robust educational frameworks that empower citizens to engage with political decisions thoughtfully, critically, and wisely, thereby safeguarding against the very perils Socrates so accurately predicted. Seeking election could exploit our desire for easy answers. He asked us to imagine an election debate between two candidates, one who was like a doctor and the other who was like a sweet shop owner. The sweet shop owner would say of his rival, "Look, this person here has worked many evils on you. He hurts you, gives you bitter potions, and tells you not to eat and drink whatever you like. He'll never serve you feasts of many and varied pleasant things like I will." Socrates asks us to consider the audience response. Do you think the doctor would be able to reply effectively? This analogy, vividly presented by Socrates, cuts to the heart of his concern about the vulnerability of an uneducated electorate to demagogic appeals. The doctor, representing the wise and responsible leader, offers difficult truths and proposes actions that, while beneficial in the long run, may be immediately unpalatable. This includes advocating for discipline, temperance, and making choices that require effort and sacrifice. The bitter potions and restrictions on indulgence are necessary for the health of the body politic, just as they are for an individual's physical well-being. In stark contrast, the sweet shop owner symbolizes the demagogue, who promises immediate gratification, easy solutions, and an endless supply of pleasant things. This candidate bypasses complex realities and appeals directly to desires for comfort, pleasure, and effortless prosperity. Such a figure avoids discussing hard work, difficult choices, or the long-term consequences of unchecked indulgence. Socrates' provocative question, "Do you think the doctor would be able to reply effectively?" highlights his pessimism. He implies that in a society where citizens lack the intellectual discipline and foresight to value long-term health over immediate pleasure, the doctor's rational arguments and warnings would likely fall on deaf ears. The allure of the sweet shop owner's easy promises would prove far more appealing to a populace unwilling or unable to confront uncomfortable truths. This analogy serves as a timeless warning about the perpetual struggle between responsible governance that demands foresight and popular appeals that exploit immediate gratification. Think the doctor would be able to reply effectively? The true answer, "I cause you trouble and go against you desires in order to help you," would cause an uproar among the voters, don't you think? We have forgotten all about Socrates' salient warnings against democracy. We have preferred to think of democracy as an unambiguous good, rather than as something that is only ever as effective as the education system that surrounds it. As a result, we have elected many sweet shop owners and very few doctors. Socrates' profound insight into human nature and political dynamics continues to resonate today. The doctor's honest, yet unpalatable truth about necessary sacrifices and difficult choices is often met with resistance, even hostility, by an electorate that prefers comforting allusions to harsh realities. This inherent human tendency to favor immediate gratification over long-term well-being is precisely what demagogues, the sweet shop owners of politics, exploit so effectively. They promise boundless prosperity, effortless solutions, and an end to all discomfort, appealing directly to our basest desires and anxieties. The tragic consequence of this societal oversight, as Socrates foresaw, is the consistent election of leaders who prioritize popularity and superficial appeals over genuine statesmanship and the arduous work of responsible governance. These sweet shop owners may offer temporary delights, but their policies often lead to long-term societal ailments, just as an excessive diet of sweets leads to poor health. In contrast, the doctors, those rare leaders willing to propose difficult but necessary measures for the collective good, struggle to gain traction because their messages lack the immediate allure of easy answers. This neglect of Socrates' warnings has fostered a dangerous misconception that democracy is inherently foolproof. We have detached the ideal of popular rule from the crucial prerequisite of an informed and critically thinking citizenry. Without an educational system that rigorously trains individuals in rational thought, ethical discernment, and civic responsibility, democracy risks becoming a mere popularity contest, susceptible to the whims of the crowd and the manipulations of those who promise the sweetest, yet ultimately most harmful, treats. The true strength and sustainability of a democracy, therefore, lies not just in its structures, but fundamentally in the wisdom and intellectual fortitude of its people.